Thank you, Professor Werner, for your interesting and inspiring lecture. אני מזמין את אבי בלסברגר, מנהל סוכנות החלל הישראלית, לנהל את המושב הבא.
Good morning again. This session will include two presentations, and then we will have the head of Space Agency panel. It is already a tradition in the conference to have reviews of latest news in several interesting fields: space policy and security, science from space, and the latest news in space technology. Ms. Gil Barham will deliver the first such review on space policy and security. Ms. Gil Barham is head of research at the Yuval Naaman Workshop for Science, Technology and Security, specializing in cybersecurity and space policy. Gil is also a PhD candidate in the Tel-Aviv University School of Political and Science, International Relations and Government. Gil's research agenda focused on national strategies during cyber conflict. Gil holds an MA Security Study from Tel-Aviv University, magna cum laude. Gil, please.
Okay. So, thank you, Avi, for your kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. In the next 10 minutes, I will share with you some of the main insights and trends that we have seen in space policy and security during 2017. But first, let's start with some numbers. The past year, we had 84 successful launches out of 90, and the US was the leading country with 29 launches, and that is after sharing the lead with China in 2016. This year, more than 350 satellites were launched, and we witnessed the historical launch of 104 satellites of the Indian Space Agency. The private sector also had made many successes this year. For example, we can see that SpaceX finished the year with 18 launches, which is the same as China. And this year, we also welcome new players into the Space Club as new countries launched their own satellites, such as Finland, Latvia, and more. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the things that happened the past year. The first interesting trend we have seen was the growing interest from the security sector in the private launch industry. It's an important trend, and we have seen that the security sector, especially the American one, has started to engage and use private space companies for launches. For example, we have seen that SpaceX launched a payload for the NRO and the private space plan, and Blue Origin is planning to enter the national security market with its new Glenn rocket. And last one, Virgin Orbit has announced the formation of Vox Space, which will focus on national security space customers. Okay. Like the launch industry, the satellite imagery sector has also witnessed closer cooperation between private companies and national security agencies. The past year we have seen the nature of the imagery services has changed. Rather than simply providing images, suppliers are now providing images along with computer-based analysis so as to help customers to deal with the information overload. The most interesting thing we have seen this year was a switch from supplying imagery data to supplying imagery-based services to government clients and replacing human skills with automation and big data analysis. Regarding space security and sustainability, in the past year, we have seen the raising attention to the threats on military and commercial space systems. Of course, the cyber threat was one of them, and the growing demand for communication is rising, and threats are becoming bigger and bigger. Regarding space debris, as was mentioned before, we have seen the problem of space debris that was increasing, and it was due to the growing demand of large satellite fleets in low Earth orbits. Solutions are only starting to emerge, and this problem is expected to grow in the coming years. If we look closely at individual countries, we see some interesting developments as well. In the US, we have seen the reestablishment of the National Space Council by President Trump after 15 years. And also, Trump have declared that going back to the moon as a base for sending astronauts to Mars was NASA's biggest mission for the coming years. In the American security space sector, we have seen that there were discussions about separating the Air Force Space Command, from the Air Force, and reforming it as an independent command. This process has not yet finished, and it will be interesting to see what 2018 brings. Russia, this year, the Russian space program continued to suffer from delays and failures. It had some setback in launching new satellites, and its plan to build a new launch site continue to repeatedly be stalled. But Russia successfully launched the first 3D printing satellite from the International Space Station, and it had a successful year in strengthening its international cooperation with NASA, China, among others, and more. China continued the past year its effort in building its own space station and invested a lot in developing new space technologies. China also had a successful year regarding international space cooperation, and it launched the first satellite to the International Space Station from the US soil. In Europe continued developing its successful programs from previous years, such as the Prometheus reusable rocket engine and the Bepi Columbus mission to Mercury. Of course, one of the most interesting trends or interesting things we have seen, and which has not ended yet, was the effect of the Brexit on the UK space sector. There were many worries that the Brexit might harm the British space sector, and the government has already started to allocate resources in order to support the sector during this process. And as was mentioned before, France and Italy had successful launches of satellites that were built with Israel, and Germany and Luxembourg had made substantial progress in strengthening their space programs. In Asia, India, after its historical launch, had suffered from unsuccessful launch that led to a setback in its launches after more than 20 years. And India worked hard this year to strengthen its international cooperation with France and Israel, among others, and supported its local space industry by reducing regulation in order to ease private space companies to enter the market. Japan also made its first launch of military communication satellite and was working hard with international and commercial partners regarding space debris solutions. Here in the Middle East, Israel had won a diplomatic achievement as it was elected to serve on the steering bureau of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and that was the first time. Other countries in the region also made some interesting progress in their space activities, as Morocco launched its first observation satellites, while Saudi Arabia continued to invest large sums of money to modernize and develop its own space program. To sum up, this year we have seen a growing interest in the security sector in private space companies, as the security sector understands and realizes the benefits the private companies may provide to national security needs. Also, we have seen the continued cooperation between national space actors, especially regarding space exploration. It will be interesting to see how these trends will continue to develop during 2018. Thank you for your attention.